This week's sermon is one that I spent more time working on than is usual. For one thing, I ordinarily write my sermons on Thursday mornings, and I started this one on Wednesday afternoon after I got my COVID-19 vaccination shot. It was a Johnson & Johnson shot, so there was only one jab, and I started writing this sermon about 4 hours after my vaccination, just as the side effects were starting to descend upon my body. I was able to write about a quarter of the sermon before the exhaustion hit me and I fell asleep in my chair. I actually don't know how long I was out before I dragged myself across the room to my bed, where one of my cats and I napped until just before dinner, when a swollen lymph node in my armpit woke me up. I stumbled back into my chair and I wrote another couple of hundred words before Ann and I celebrated my vaccination with a bottle of bubbly wine and a dinner of pulled pork. We watched a movie together and I went back to bed. I slept soundly, but I woke up with aches in places that I didn't even know were capable of sensing pain. Despite feeling pretty bad, I worked on my sermon all morning, and by mid-afternoon I had what I thought was a really good sermon. I had done more research than I usually do, and the sermon was long. It was much longer than my usual videotaped sermons, but I was eager to get it recorded and ready to go. And then my sermon disappeared. For the last few months, I've been writing my sermons using a writing device that is not a regular computer. It's just a word processor, and it's meant to be distraction-free, and it works like a dream, except that on Thursday, it lost my sermon. It was like Thanos had snapped his finger. The damn thing disintegrated into thin air. The sermon was on the subject of doubt. The day when I got my COVID vaccine, it seemed like a good day to be writing a sermon on doubt, because the pandemic has, in some ways, challenged my long-standing commitment to the idea that doubts are always good. For decades, I've considered it axiomatic that doubt is an essential, necessary, and beneficial part of the life of faith. I have committed to memory the words of Frederick Buechner, who in his book Wishful Thinking wrote, "Whether your faith is that there is a God or that there is not a God, if you don't have any doubts, you are either kidding yourself or you are asleep. Doubts are the ants in the pants of faith. They keep it awake and moving." Also, in his epigraph to John Irving's novel A Prayer for Owen Meany, Buechner writes, "Not the least of my problems is that I can hardly even imagine what kind of experience a genuine self-authenticating religious experience might be. Without somehow destroying me in the process, how could God reveal himself in a way that would leave no room for doubt? If there were no room for doubt, there would be no room for me." Those quotes resonate with me. I have tried to preach doubt-friendly sermons on a fairly regular basis throughout my almost 28 years of pastoral ministry. And I do this in large part because I need it. I need to be reminded that my doubts do not disqualify me as a good Christian. In fact, they make me a better Christian, and more importantly, they make me a better human being. The same is true for you and for your doubts. This I truly believe, and it applies both to religious doubting, which keeps us humble and honest. I mean, how many religious fanatics have committed atrocities in the name of God while shouting, "Well, I could be wrong"? It doesn't happen. And I think it's also true in secular settings. Doubts help us to confront tyrants, and they inspire us to work out creative solutions to various problems. I rather suspect scientific and technological progress could not really happen in the absence of doubt. So when in this week's lesson from the Gospel according to John, Thomas doubts, when he says he cannot believe in the resurrection until he touches Jesus' pierced hands in his side, well, that feels like a really human moment. And when Jesus doesn't get angry with Thomas for his doubts, but instead lets him satisfy his curiosity, well, that feels like an affirmation of the doubting process. To be sure, Jesus says that those who believe without seeing are to be blessed, and that's true. I sometimes feel envious of those who believe without needing proof, but still, Jesus was prepared to let Thomas see for himself and to learn, and I trust that the Holy One is prepared to open my eyes as well, and yours. It's all part of a very good process. But then here comes COVID. And my commitment to the goodness of doubting is challenged by the fact that so many people doubt the science of viruses and vaccinations. They doubt the need for masks and for social distancing. And it seems to me their doubts pose a very real threat to the well-being of the rest of us. And I struggle with that. I was especially struggling with it when my body hurt and I felt miserable after my shot. Maybe my misery just wanted company. But I became impatient for everyone to get over themselves and to get with the program and to get vaccinated. I mean, life is precious. We need, at last, to put this pandemic behind us, and the sooner, the better. We need to live, and we need to live well. We can't have doubters out there breathing on each other in bars or singing into each other's airspace in churches. It works against the goal of public health. And conversely, if I'm not careful, I fear I might feel a similar impatience with the doubts of those who will be unable to trust the scientists when they say the pandemic is over. And that will happen. Some portion of us will never trust that it is safe to go out without a mask. Some among us will remain isolated long after the pandemic is over. And I think I'll be able to honor and to respect the decisions that individuals make because they doubt the end of the pandemic. But I won't be celebrating those doubts. I will consider them tragic outcomes of 15 months or more of this COVID lockdown. So what's the answer? How do we know when doubts are good, and how do we know when they are not helpful to ourselves or to others? Well, honestly, I do not know. But I can say that I think there are at least 3 different kinds of doubt that are healthy and good. There are probably more than 3, but 3 is how many I can think of right now. One good kind of doubting is what we might call existential doubts. These are the kinds of doubts that I have had most of in my life. These are religious doubts. When we doubt the existence of God, for example, or we doubt the possibility that God can be Trinitarian, or we doubt the possibility of eternal life, or whatever. Existential doubts are profoundly honest doubts. They keep us humble, and they prevent the onset of fanaticism. Now, it's possible that in this week's lesson from John, Thomas was experiencing some existential doubts when he didn't believe in the resurrection at first. It may have been that he doubted that God could do something like raise Jesus from the dead, which is an understandable doubt. But it's also possible that Thomas just needed to check things out for himself. And that leads to my second kind of good doubting, which is doubting that happens because we are curious. Sometimes we doubt because we don't understand, but we want to understand. Curiosity doubts are good because they help us to learn, and to grow, and to expand our horizons. Curiosity doubts are the doubts that drive science and academic research. They also are the doubts that lead to great art and great storytelling. When in the story Thomas asks to see the marks of Jesus' crucifixion, he's being curious, he's exploring, he's learning. Curiosity, exploration, learning, these are all good things that can lead to the third kind of doubting, which is good doubting. And that is doubt that is grounded in what we know. Notice I've gone from unknowing through curiosity to doubts rooted in what is known. It is possible that Thomas doubted Jesus' resurrection because he had some experience with life and death, and he knew that no corpse could walk out of a grave. A ghost, perhaps, but a reanimated cadaver? Not so much. Doubts rooted in what we know are really important. And one of the reasons we get educated is so that we can call out malarkey when we see it. This is important. And it's especially important when our doubts are guided by what we know about right and wrong, just and unjust, good and evil. It so happens that I wrote this sermon on Yom HaShoah, the day for remembering the Holocaust. Now, those of us who know our history know how important it is to doubt the goodness of fascism and of ethnic nationalism. When we look for heroes as we remember the Holocaust, we find doubters among our heroes, people who, because of what they knew to be true, questioned official Nazi anti-Semitism. Often, but not often enough, the knowledge that inspired this doubt was religious and spiritual knowledge. And that's how it should be. People of faith have a profoundly important role to play in articulating our doubts when, to quote William Butler Yeats, things fall apart, the center cannot hold, mere anarchy is loosed upon the earth. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and suddenly the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, and the worst are full of passionate intensity. Real human lives depend upon our righteous doubts. Now, there are bad reasons to doubt as well, things like orneriness or posturing or just being contrary for the sake of being a contrarian or because it feels somehow hip and cool to be angsty. And I sort of suspect that some of that may be happening when people doubt the benefits of COVID vaccine. Yet still, I know that some people will bring really good doubts, existential doubts, doubts born of curiosity, and doubts rooted in knowledge. They'll bring these good doubts to the work of thinking about how to live in the age of COVID, and those doubts will still lead some people to refuse a vaccination, and it will lead some people to refuse to wear a mask or to practice social distancing rules. The first time I wrote this sermon, before it got lost in the ether, when I was still suffering the achy side effects of my Johnson & Johnson vaccine, the idea that some people, while practicing the very best of doubts, might not join me in getting vaccinated for the good of the community, well, that was causing me a bit of despair. And I really didn't know how to end the sermon. In fact, I don't remember how I ended that sermon before it disappeared. But then, about 10 p.m. on Thursday night, when I was finishing the rewrite of this sermon after most of my side effects had subsided and the stoicism of my healthy body and my mind returned, well, I was able to reconcile myself to the notion that just as it's impossible to get everyone believing the same way, so it also is impossible to get everyone doubting in the same way. All we can do is doubt and believe in the ways that seem best to us and best for our families and best for our communities. And for me, that combination of belief and doubt meant getting my vaccination shot as soon as I was eligible. But not everyone will do as I did, and that makes it all the more important that those of us who do not doubt the science of viruses and vaccines, it's important for us to go out and get ourselves jabbed by whatever vaccine is close at hand, or maybe it's close at arm. Either way, let's work together to do what we can, believing as we are able and doubting when necessary. Let's do whatever we can to make COVID-19 a pandemic of the past. May it be so, and may that day come quickly. Amen.